Hereafter.
Yes.
Hereafter is Clint Eastwood's latest film. This is like 7th film in 7 years, something incredible like that. He's been on an unbelievable clip. He is now 80, believe it or not. Clint Eastwood is 80 years old. And obviously he's starting to think about his mortality a little bit. Hereafter is a really interesting, almost metaphysical drama in which Matt Damon, there are 3 separate stories in the film, but the one that everyone's focusing on is the Matt Damon story, wherein he plays a psychic who doesn't really like being a psychic. And everything in his life is pain because he's able to connect to the hereafter, and people still seek him out to somehow help commune with their deceased loved ones. Do we have a clip?
We do.
Let's see a clip.
Can I ask you a question?
Would it be okay if I told you the answer was no?
You don't even know what I was gonna ask.
Yes, I do. You can ask me if I can do a reading for you. Look, Melanie, I barely know you, but I like you. A lot, really a lot. And is there any way we could just pretend that maybe we go back in time and just forget about the phone ringing and my brother's message, and we never had this conversation?
Why?
Because if we open the door and go down that road, any chance that we had of having something normal will just be gone. I mean, sometimes, you know, knowing everything about someone, it's, you know, it seems nice, but really, maybe it's actually better to hold stuff back.
So that scene with Bryce Dallas Howard is really uncomfortable, and it's a really interesting part of the movie. She's not in a lot of it, but it's that particular relationship is pretty slick. The film itself, I really liked a lot. I thought it was provocative. I thought it raised a lot of interesting questions. It didn't play the whole connect to the hereafter angle for exploitative gain. It didn't play it for sensationalism. It's not like Ghost. It's not like Brainstorm. It isn't like any of the movies that have ever been made before. It's maybe not as deep as it should be. It doesn't sort of reach any great philosophical conclusions, but it does make you think, which is more than I can say for most films that I see these days.
I guess. I certainly did not buy it as much as you did. In fact, I remember we went to the same screening.
Yeah.
We sat in separate places, and I was watching the film, and I didn't quite buy it. I thought that Clint Eastwood was a little out of his wheelhouse, even though he is 80 years old.
His wheelhouse?
Yes.
What's a wheelhouse?
Well, the sort of films that Clint Eastwood usually does. He usually doesn't do these movies about like death and tsunamis and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
He doesn't really mount that stuff. And I remember going up to where you were sitting.
Yeah.
I was
in the balcony.
I was gonna say to you.
I was in a special place.
I was gonna say to you, I didn't really buy that, and you were like, you were over the moon over it. But you had to admit that you slept on it, and it
You
faded.
sleep on it, and it fades.
Yes.
It definitely fades. But it didn't fade a lot. I was still thinking about it, and I still think, you know, I wouldn't mind seeing it again.
You know,
it's an enjoyable film. And the 3 separate stories, you know, it's not like Babel or a lot of these other multi-threaded movies where you have a real kind of metaphysical, existential subtext to the way everything integrates. It really is 3 separate stories, the Matt Damon story, the French journalist, and the kids in London, and they do all sort of get onto a track and eventually converge in a very, very conventional way, which is surprising for Peter Morgan, who I think is probably the best screenwriter in the world, with The Queen and countless other great films to his name.
Damn United.
Damned United. Really an amazing screenwriter, but still, it's a very thoughtful script, and it's an original script, and it's one that I think has a certain personal touch to it, so I appreciated that.
I didn't buy even the baseline of it, which is that in the movie, Matt Damon plays somebody who can speak to the dead, and I think that he is convinced, and the audience is convinced, that he really can. Basically, the movie starts with a guy who really can speak to the dead.
Yes.
And so right at the top, I didn't buy it, because not that I believe or don't believe people can speak to the dead.
But you can speak to the dead, and it doesn't work like that.
I talk to you every Thursday at 8 p.m. Pacific time.
There you go. This is what we
What's wrong
do.
with that?
This
It's good comedy.
This is the funny.
This is the funny?
This is the funny.
The internet is canceled.
Okay.
So right baseline I didn't buy, because I felt it would have been more interesting if it was like an inquiry into whether or not he's a fraud, he's not a fraud, can he speak to the dead, would you want to, all this stuff. So right at the baseline, it's a little, not science fiction, but a little phony to me.
It does require a leap. What I like about that stuff, though, is that Clint, whenever he does the little touch the hands thing, where, you know, it triggers it. Let me just touch you. There's always a flash. And it's a flash of the hereafter, a flash of someone and some kind of silhouette-y people somewhere, and that's all you get. you don't sort of then go into heaven or go into the hereafter or into the void and see things. There's just a brief glimpse. And then the rest is all what he tells and what he spells out in dialogue. And
but what he spells out in dialogue is so typical of these movies. Like, oh, your father was blah blah, your sister was blah blah.
You would say it if he was doing a reading of you.
Because I don't have a sister.
Oh, but you have a cat. Or had a cat.
I had a cat.
You had a cat.
I had the same cat from when I was 4 till I was 21. What do you think of that?
He loves this story. You tell the story. You always find a way to tell this story.
I've never told the story on. By the way, it's not a story. I just had a cat for 17 years. But what I'm saying, I've never told it on the show. The end.
Plays well.
Huh? It doesn't play well. And by the way, thanks to that cat, to this day, when I sleep, don't use a pillow. Why? Because when you're 4 years old, you want your cat to be happy. You let him sleep on the pillow. Because I'm 4 years old, I want my cat to be happy. Well, you know what? I had the cat for 17 years. So for 17 years, he slept on the pillow. I'm 21 years old. Cat dies. Pillow? I don't know what you're talking about.
Is this a movie show?
Anyway.
How is Mark single? I don't know. This is ladies. Come on. All right.
Anyway,
What else
so
you got?
so just to wrap up here, after
Yes.
there's a terrific sequence with Bryce Dallas Howard. Bryce Dallas Howard
Yeah.
and Matt Damon meet at a cooking class because Matt Damon's kind of trying to get out of his comfort zone, takes a cooking class, and there's a very sexy, really good scene where they're partnered up in this cooking class,
Yeah.
and in order to get to sort of in order to test other senses, Bryce
You
Dallas
blindfold.
puts a blindfold on
Blindfold
herself, and then he feeds her, and I found that a very sexy, a terrific scene.
Well, it's also an interesting scene because it sort of parallels what he does, that you're relying on other senses, and you know, she appreciates that, but then gets a little freaked out later on. It's interesting. It's a lot of interesting symbolism in the film.
Okay, by the way, before we move on, there's something very important we have to say, and I think I speak for Wade.
Yes.
When we Wade, look into the camera with me. You don't know what I'm going to say, but you're going to agree with me. Clint Eastwood, stop scoring your own films.
Oh, totally.
You are the worst composer ever.
Yeah.
Ever. I don't know what it is with you where you think you can score your own. First of all, look, I didn't like Lenny Niehaus. Not a big fan of Lenny Niehaus. Then you had your son Kyle score your films. That was pretty bad. Then for some godforsaken reason, you started scoring your films. They all sound the same. They're this little simple, tinkly piano thing that's the same tempo, same instrumentation. You lay it over. Feels like a terrible temp track. And it feels like a track where you would go to the composer and say, listen to this and do the opposite. But instead he says, no, here's the score.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why he scores his own movies. It's terrible.
I don't know.
Okay.
I concur.
No, but okay, one last thing. How good would Hereafter be? Not that much better because I didn't like the movie. But how much better would it be if you got somebody, Alexander Desplat, to do that score?
It would be great. I think Desplat's starting to be a little bit repetitive himself, though. I got to confess, after the film that I saw today, that you saw last night, which we won't talk about yet, but I do think that he's starting to sort of repeat himself a little bit. He's doing too many movies at the same time.
That is true.
Because I mean, it used to be one film a year. You can knock a great score out that way, but when people start paying you, you know, big money, big six-figure money, you want to do a lot of movies a year, so you start, you know, cut and paste.